Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Anurag here. You're creating a new company in the blockchain space, Web3 space called Avail. I mean, you have experience being co-founder of Polygon. Polygon was super instrumental in the space, but one of the most important things that it did was to help make Web3 mainstream through partnerships with very well-known consumer brands and just an easy-to-use infrastructure that was fast, affordable, and cheap. And now with Avail, you're solving a solution that really helps the roll-up centric future be something that's possible. And you've got some great partnerships, raise a seed round backed by the Founders Fund and others. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Yep. Thanks. I'm looking forward, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. So where did your passion for entrepreneurship technology begin? Like when did you think, hey, I'm going to go and build in the blockchain space and make a company there?
Yeah. Okay. I entered the crypto industry back in 2017. Before that, I'd spent around 11 years in various product and engineering roles at technology startups. So I worked in fintech and regulatory tech companies. And so in 2017 is when I met my fellow co-founders, Jayanti and Sandeep, um, at this co-working space that I had joined to do another startup. But we got to talking, and then they Jayanti specifically asked me to look into Bitcoin, and so I started reading. I remember reading the Mastering Bitcoin book in one night because it was just too interesting. And I just fell down the rabbit hole from Bitcoin to Ethereum to Cosmos and others. And around the same time, Ethereum was going through one of its first scaling issues, like something called CryptoKitties had blew up, and so there was just too much congestion. And those were pretty little bit of the early days, but there was just too much congestion, and so the need to scale Ethereum was becoming apparent. And something called Plasma had been announced, like the white paper had launched, but there wasn't no implementation for that. And so we thought we would build out Polygon or Matic Network when it was known back then, to build one of the first scaling solutions for Ethereum. So essentially, I mean, that's kind of the rough story in general. Like we kind of started, like just a bunch of, like us three, just fiddling around how to build the first scaling solution for Ethereum. Because we, after going, like once you get into the blockchain rabbit hole, right, you suddenly, like I was this guy who was doing fintech products and such, and suddenly you are able to kind of build systems that like power financial systems at scale. And so that was like a very, I'm a computer engineer, like by education. So I already had a deep engineering roots, but this was like an opportunity to build these complex systems that I didn't really get too much of an opportunity to do in traditional tech companies. So I think that and then once we kind of dove right in, so the opportunity was pretty evident that there's just a lot of good work to be done here, and for a good purpose. So that was like really the beginning. It wasn't really very easy at the beginning. No one knew us. We were just this small team based in India at the time. And we spent about 2 years building this, before we actually got our first external financing round, right? Like, so we just spent the first 2 years on just funds that we got from family and friends and such, for example.
Mm.
But we were very, we wanted to create something very meaningful. And so that's why, so there's a lot of wartime stories and such, which like we may not have time to get into. But yeah, in general, like initially it wasn't that easy, but we kind of built very scrappily and had a small team. Then like in 2020 we ended up around launching what is known as the Polygon POS chain, and we knew what we were building was valuable because at the time there wasn't a fast cheap solution for blockchain transactions. And so once we went to the market, there was a lot of demand, and initially we got a lot of applications. But in 2021 there was this whole DeFi summer thing where protocols like Aave and Sushi and all deployed on top of Polygon, and it just blew up in general. So, but yeah, I mean, of course, lots of struggle at the beginning, but in general, I mean, we are still, of course, building more and more stuff. At Polygon, we transitioned to rollups, building rollups. So we released the Polygon ZK EVM rollup last year, for example, and we had also kind of started Avail, which is the product or project that I'm working on right now. We had actually started that within Polygon back in 2020,
Huh.
and so had been building it inside Polygon, but we thought that it would be much better served to build spin Avail out of Polygon and operate as a separate company, because Avail is really this infrastructure for the rollup centric future, and we sincerely believe that rollups are the future in terms of how newer blockchains will be created. And so we wanted to be infrastructure for all rollups, not only Polygon rollups. So that was some of the reasons why we spun out, and I left all operation roles at Polygon last year.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'll pause for any questions.
So, how long did it take to make the first version of Polygon, and like, how did you start getting customers and people to actually use the blockchain?
So we are a very pragmatic engineering team in that sense. So even before we had the complete solution up and running, we were actually running like testnets and devnets
Hmm.
back in like 2018 itself. Like our first testnet, if I'm not wrong, was in uh, June 2018. This was just like we started in 2017, late 2017, and this was so we had like a working prototype already available on testnet for developers to use, and we actually spent a lot of time working with app developers, helping them build applications. We ourselves wrote a lot of code. Um, we even wrote out a mobile wallet, for example, because at the time wallets were not that user friendly, for example. So we did a lot of things that typically people, like slot in the category of things that don't scale.
Hmm.
So initially we did a lot of that. I mean, I remember being in probably few hundred Telegram groups with different teams, just helping them out, answering queries, so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of effort that we did in helping developers initially, because it's difficult at that time for developers to get quality documentation on how to write programs on blockchain, for example, and so on. So there's a lot of things that like that don't scale sort of stuff that we did back then.
Hmm. So, why is it so important now that you're focusing on this roll-up centric future? Like, what do you see in the roll-up technology that makes you want to go really all in on this?
So, like if you kind of go back toward how blockchains have evolved over time. So Bitcoin was the first blockchain but Ethereum was the first general purpose blockchain. And after that, what has happened is that the iterations on how new blockchains are created are essentially versions of Ethereum which are either faster or are cheaper or have bigger blocks or have some other optimization. So for example, if after Ethereum you can see blockchains like EOS or Phantom or Solana, for example. So all of these are iterations on how to make Ethereum better, for example. But the thing is, what rollups were introduced like in the 2019 2020. That was the rough period in which these were proposed and started to getting implemented. And like rollups are also blockchains, but how they differ from a general what we call a layer one blockchain is that they don't need to kind of bootstrap cryptoeconomic security on their own. So it's like basically when you do a new blockchain, you have so of course you have to create the execution environment on which developers can build apps, but you also need to do things like getting a set of validators to run the chain, um, having cryptoeconomic security in the sense that you need to have a token, you need to have the token to have value, for example. So there's a lot of operational aspects of spinning up a new blockchain. And rollups kind of solve that in the sense that the world now moves to like this whole new blockchains being rollups, being dependent on this one secure base layer. And so these rollups then inherit security from the base layer. So in the sense that now rollups don't need to kind of like recruit validators or have to bootstrap cryptoeconomic security and so on. So you can do more innovation on the rollup side, for example. So I'll give you an example, like something like Base. So Base is this chain that was created by Coinbase. Like they didn't build the chain from scratch. They took the code that was there that the optimism team had developed, the OP stack, and then they kind of took that to build up a chain, and then they've focused on what was important to them. So this was things like user acquisition, adoption, GTM, for example, and they have been pretty successful in that sense. So in general, the idea is that like I try to give this analogy that of about apps on the internet. Like apps on the internet don't really live on one single big supercomputer. They live on like these different servers and they are scaled independently based on demand. And so why I don't see any reason why this same mental model won't apply to blockchain architecture. So I don't believe that all the apps on blockchain can fit on one single blockchain, however efficient it is. Like it will always be the case that it will be on different servers and such, for example. And in blockchains, rollups are the best equivalent of servers in the blockchain sense. And so that's why I see this future of hundreds of thousands of rollups, and all of them need this base layer to work on top of. And so we have designed Avail to be one of those base layers. So that's roughly why like we are quite bullish on rollups as such, and Avail is really infrastructure for powering this rollup centric future.
Why was the Founders Fund such a great fit to be involved in your round?
So if you kind of look at the founder fund portfolio, like generally founders fund backs these generational sort of companies, right? Like so companies like SpaceX, Tesla, for example, and so on, right? Like so in general, the idea is that you have the project like has to be ambitious in scope, like it has to be changing something fundamental about how society functions, how the world functions, for example, right? Like so in general, so of course I talked about a lot of blockchains, rollups being the future, for example, but I just for a moment I just want to get back into why we are building, like why is
Sure.
this entire industry building all the infrastructure for, right? Like essentially I believe that what blockchains are best useful for is building this next generation of trust systems. And what I mean by that is, like, if you kind of zoom out a bit and see how trust has evolved over the centuries. So if you go back a few hundred years, people used to live in small communities, and trust there was this circle of trust was within the community, and like interactions outside the community were frequently not safe, for example. But as years have passed on, as society has matured with the with tech, especially with technology, like I mean, those trust barriers have broken down. The circle of trust has expanded. Like today, anyone sitting in the US can transact with someone halfway across the world, fully of the belief that the transaction will go through. So it's all like why the world has progressed to this extent is, of course, there's a like technology has improved and so on and so forth. But how, if we kind of look at how society functions, there is a very strong trust element that is attached to how it functions. Like it's not possible to know all the people in the world, right? Like you have to kind of
Mhm.
have some basis for trust, and this trust is built up over time, and it kind of concentrates in a few areas. So this is like there are these intermediaries. This can be things like the government, but it can be corporations, organizations, and so on. So like something like if we are kind of having this conversation, this is through an intermediary, like called Riverside, which is kind of facilitating us having this conversation and like recording this, for example, halfway across the world in
Mhm.
general. If you want to do a payment from like within the US, for example, you might do a Venmo payment. If you want to do it with someone who is not in the Venmo network, you might have to do a bank payment, for example. All of these are intermediaries, and of course, intermediaries work fine for a lot of places, but the world is a big place. It's not equal in that sense. There are pockets of high trust, there
Mhm.
are pockets of low trust. And so in societies where there is historically been high trust, these economies are like do well, and low trust societies don't do that well. And so of course, so I believe that blockchains are this evolution of like how do we kind of build this next generation of trust systems.
Mhm.
And in general, I think from a more tactical and strategic aspect, like from an infrastructural aspect, like roll-ups in that context are the way to kind of scale these trust systems. So
Mhm.
that's roughly why I'm very bullish.
Mhm. And Anurag, what do you think it will take to make blockchain technology something that's mainstream, that's used by people on an everyday basis? Like, it's starting to get there more, but what do you think will are some of the steps that can really become a mainstream use technology?
Yeah, so like taking from my previous answer, right? Like essentially these are trust systems that we are building, and these kind of replace the role of intermediaries. Now we have to kind of study where these intermediaries are in current day systems. And I think in developed countries, what happens is these intermediaries are generally work well, but sometimes there can be inefficiencies. So you can use this technology to like increase efficiencies, decrease latency, for example, and so on. So in less developed countries, sometimes this infrastructure, this intermediate infrastructure itself not there. So there you
Mhm.
kind of apply this to those use cases. So I mean, just to give concrete examples, like if you're a trader on something like the Nasdaq or the NYSE, for example, these systems, like typically when you trade stocks, there is like the stock trade on your mobile app or on the application itself is instantaneous, but actually the settlement happens after
Mhm.
1 day or 2 days. Like there's something called this T+1 T+2 sort of period, where actually the if you buy a stock, the stock comes after you, because all of this is run on, like the world runs on ledgers, and all of this is run on different ledgers. So for all of this to be more efficient, there has to be these ledgers have to be talking to each other more frequently, and settlement has to happen more frequently. And the idea is that how can we apply blockchain technology, let's say, to the stock trading problem, where we can reduce T+2 time to instantaneous. Like if you go to something like a Uniswap on Ethereum, for example, you are able to do a trade almost instantly, or on Polygon, for example. Of course, these are mostly digital assets, but you can already see something like the USD being tokenized via way of USDT or USDC, for example. And so you can imagine like lots of real world items that are being able to trade, right? Like, so it's not a technology issue at this point in time. It's more about how do we educate those people to kind of use this technology more. And so it's also a little bit of a regulatory education, for example, all of that, right? Like, so there's a bunch of stuff there. um, but in less developed countries, like, you don't have an NYC or a Nasdaq everywhere, for example. Like,
Hmm.
it's not that all countries have very highly liquid exchanges for stocks, for example. So I'm just giving this financial example, but there are a bunch of other examples. So I mean, it's you have to kind of look at where these intermediaries that moderate trust lie, and then figure out what are the inefficiencies, or where the service is not possible, for example. So
So as a replacement for like these ledgers, that's where it can really be a great fit.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The world runs on ledgers. I mean, at the bare minimum, even if this entire experiment of blockchains doesn't work out, you still have like a ledger that can be accessible from any corner of the world, and people can plug in. That itself is like a, I mean, I'm think in my opinion, that is the worst outcome that can happen. Like, even if that's the worst
Mhm.
outcome, it's like a very good outcome. um, the best outcome is that we have completely new systems and organizations being built on this infra.
Mhm.
And so we'll see.
So, what are you now hoping to accomplish with Avail? I know you have the launch of the mainnet coming up. You have your own solution you've been developing. Like, what are some of your goals now for Avail?
So we've been working on this for about 3.5 years now. So initially the focus is to get as many roll-up developers and other developers just use the infrastructure, and use that to iterate on various other components that we want to build on top. So we are launching Avail DA mainnet for now, which helps in scaling of rollups. We want to build out the next component, which is Avail Nexus, which will help connect these rollups together, so that users are not exposed to all this complexity of multiple chains and so on.
Hmm.
So essentially, we want to get it to a place where developers find it easy to kind of use this infra to build these trust systems that I speak about. So lowering the barrier for developers, regular developers, to access this and apply it to their business use cases, for example, and in general to make the user experience seamless.
Hmm. So it's about the ease of use and the ability to get more developers on board.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Do you see AI being a factor in the scaling of blockchain to be replacements for traditional ledgers? Like, how do you see AI being most impactful to what you're building at Avail?
I think so. In general, there's a bunch of things that could be done right away. There a bunch of things that can happen later. Like,
Hmm.
today, there's a lot of problems that are maybe not deterministic, in the sense that, so for example, like, so there are a couple of projects that are trying this, is to take user intents, for example, and translate it into blockchain transactions. So for example, a user says that I want to buy this NFT on this chain, and like the AI LLM agent, for example, looks at the user's wallet, figures out where they have funds, and bridges the funds to the whatever chain the NFT is, for example, and then like completes the transfer, sends the NFT back, for example. So all of this automation, for example, um, because blockchain UX at the moment, it can be a little daunting for a normal mainstream user. So I think this might be the first use case where AI is applied. But in general, I've seen other projects, for example, experiment with decentralized, uh, like inference, for example, and so on. And I think we'll see some of these use cases. One of a couple of our projects that we are working, like, which are building on top of Avail, have some of these features like decentralized inference and so on.
Hmm. Interesting. So, what's kind of unique about the Avail DA solution that you created? Like, what makes it different?
Um, I think by far Avail DA is the most advanced data availability focused solution out there. It implements something called data availability sampling using something called validity proofs. Uh,
Mhm.
this is the only system that implements data availability sampling. Data availability sampling is a pretty important verification technique that has to be implemented for blockchains that are built for rollup,
Mhm.
powering rollups. So Ethereum has it in its long-term roadmap, but we spent the last 3 years building that out, and it's finally ready. For example, so of course, a lot of this is low-level infra, but this is absolutely useful for like powering these rollups in the future.
Mhm. Well, that's all the questions that I had, Anurag. I appreciate you coming on, sharing your story, and I'm definitely excited to see what you do with Avail. I think you solve, a couple major problems, especially targeting rollups here and making them accessible to developers. And you can really this really will help get these ledgers replaced. So I wish you much success.
Yeah,